when it comes to immigration, legal or illegal, it's a cacophony of emotional voices that get the most attention. See, it doesn't matter what you think about the issue, the economics are the real arguments. If you want to come to America legally, you need to be able to support yourself, and more importantly, you need to be able to sustain that support. See, if you fail to do so, and that happens over a period of time, then your ability to remain in the country should be questioned. Just last week, in a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court lifted a nationwide injunction that prevented USCIS from enforcing a public charge rule. This rule, which was proposed in August, will make it more difficult for legal immigrants living in the United States to obtain permanent residency if they are using or if they're likely to use public assistance, like food stamps, housing, vouchers, and Medicaid. The same, by the way, applies to foreigners who would like to enter the United States on immigrant or, for that matter, non-immigrant visas. Under this new public charge rule, the immigrants will be penalized in one scenario for their application to become a legal permanent resident. That's a green card. You know that reference. Now, there are a lot of emotional arguments, especially about the need for low-skilled workers. I have a solution. For low-skilled workers, what we need to do is have temporary work visas expanded with enforcement, that's important, included if someone violates it. For foreigners seeking entry, if their income is less than 125% of the federal poverty guidelines, or about $21,550 for a couple, they could be denied entry. Critics are calling this a wealth test. It's not a wealth test. It's reality. And in economics, reality wins. It's a simple but undefeatable phrase. No nation can import poverty and thrive. Here to respond to all of this, Michael Wiles, an immigration attorney, mayor of Englewood, New Jersey, and author of the book Safe Haven in America, Battles to Open the Golden Door. Michael, thanks for joining me. Good to see you, my friend. Happy New Year.
Looks like there was a sale on this jacket.
Yeah, apparently. We came well dressed, so we have jackets in agreement. Let's see how we are on policy. All right. Look, I said it right there. We cannot import poverty, and that is not a racial statement. It's not a gender statement. It's not a xenophobic statement, as some would say it. I'm talking about the pure economics of who any country allows to enter. So on that principle alone, do we have agreement that you cannot import poverty when you look at the macroeconomics of the United States?
So first, always a privilege to be here again, David. Thank you for asking me. Bottom line here is economics matter. Our country should not be in a position where we're importing poor people, as it were, or headaches that American taxpayers are going to have to surmount. The problem is this was not a necessary process. We have a form, an affidavit of support. We have laws on the books, much like gun control, where they could have been enforced. They don't have to introduce a 19-page form where somebody can then make a open-barreled query as to the likelihood of becoming a public charge. You also don't want to take the biblical straw away from very hardworking people because of financial issues and get into the weeds where the government is now going to insist on credit reports. The federal government is going to have more content, more information on people's privacy. If you're a U.S. Marine and you marry a foreigner and you don't make enough money, you can't bring her here. If you have parents that are disabled, you can't bring them here?
I understand that point, and we're in agreement on the economics of this. But let's look at this rule and the laws that apply. This is a long-standing law, by the way. This is a rule that's been added to the law. When you dig a little bit deeper into this and the public rule that has been rolled out now, and it will take effect February 24th, by the way, this is part of a problem that has gone on. We have not enforced, and our rules, which are as important part of the legislative process, need to be in place. We can do things to fix the need for low-income workers. Let's face it, we do need low-income workers to some degree. You and I have debated before and have talked about, I think we're in agreement, that work visa programs that are enforcement based on skills-based immigration, I think is a fair way to this. But we have got to do something to stem the tide of just bringing people in, which then leads to chain migration. and then their skills don't grow because first generation tends to use more resources. Second one tends to add value to some degree, but then it's a downward curve after that economically if they don't grow up in the economy or in their skills and their education. So if we don't solve the problem, we need a rule, or if the problem exists, we need a rule to solve it.
Very articulate, and you're right principally. But since the 864 affidavit of support had enforcement teeth, all the government had to do, rather than ask for a 20-page form, is monumental paper for the government to absorb. All they had to do was enforce the laws on the books. All they had to do was take these affidavits of support, which are sworn documents, and then go execute on it when somebody has a child here, and then they let it to the local taxpayers or the local hospital pay for it. We're in agreement that the government needs to do something. But what are we telegraphing? Are we showing an invisible wall? Are we going to a certain extent, hurt the middle class workers, the future workers? The notion of chain migration, by the way, is that it's a family reunification. It's a beautiful hallmark of our immigration policy. Somebody who's working hard is going to want to bring their loved ones. They'll work harder. Now, if all of a sudden their loved one has a medical, if their loved one has a medical exigency, or if the person isn't doing as well, we've always had a third party sign an affidavit of support.
The problem in that one, and I hear you on the chain migration, is that it becomes an out of control situation. The reality of what the paperwork says about what happens is a lack of enforcement. And the follow through on this, look, anything can happen to anyone, right? Changes in life happen. And we can deal with those exceptions, which, by the way, do exist under immigration services. You know this. You're a top-notch attorney. You know that if someone has an issue, they can go back, they can appeal, they can get an attorney like you and say there are exigent circumstances here. But we cannot let it go on indefinitely. And if we grow the wealth of the nation, that's the best place we're in to help those that don't grow in wealth. So we've got to find an economic balance on that.
I think we are in crisis level backlogs already with the immigration authorities.
5 million people, I think, in the legal pipeline, according to the State Department.
And just imagine the authority now to consuls. We have no right to an immigration lawyer or any right to counsel, despite our being a democracy that hails itself as freedom. At foreign posts, you don't have a right to a lawyer. And if a consul decides on their own that there's a likelihood that you're going to become a public charge, this form, this process entitles them with greater authority than may be needed. And the enforcement of these affidavits of support that were on the books would have been a stronger move. Less paper, less government is really the mantra when it comes to making sure the government does a good job in what they're trying to do. But it's also the telegraphing, the institution of more evidence, of people having to get credit reports. Also, there'll be communities, David, that are going to end up going for a different kind of medical conduct because they don't want to run a sconce of these rules in ways that the rules were not contemplated. And there will be a subculture, much like in the detention of aliens in the United States. There'll be subculture financial institutions that are going to take advantage of
There's always
people.
going to be someone to take advantage, but we have got to set some standards and metrics. And by the way, those embassy officials are also bound by the very same rules. So they can't just randomly, if you will, and I'm going to say we're not going to let you in because your paperwork doesn't look good. You want to come to this country, you've got to present your case.
In principle,
and I have been through that. Members of my family have been through that. You present your case, you substantiate it, and you're able to sustain it. And that is what we need. We've had a problem in this country with runaway lack of enforcement. And this is a problem in government, but we've also had technological improvements. You talk about increased paperwork, increased time. We've actually lowered the time because of technology to process, and technology can be a big factor here.
It's the personal bias that plays at American embassies the world over. I can tell you, having done this for 30 years, my father, I'm a second generation immigration lawyer, is doing this for 60 years. An American consul in Nigeria is very different than an American consul in Spain. And the way they execute on these decisions and giving them this kind of authority, you know, in other words, a multi-factor test is a green light for a federal agent, officer, or consul to make any decision that they want. Keeping people in their lane, giving this golden experiment. The name of my book was Safe Haven America, Battles to Open the Golden Door. Our door has to be on a hinge. ready to close against those that will cause us harm and cost us money, and open to the greatest entrepreneurs and investors this nation has ever known. And in my opinion, and it's a humble opinion because a lot of other people have opined on this, this is going to be daunting. It's going to be daunting because now people who can't afford lawyers are going to have to go to lawyers, and the judgments that they've made genuinely to help people be healthy in their own homes, in their own businesses, are now going to be affected by bureaucrats who may not have the same discretion.
I don't have as dark a view of the bureaucrats out there. Okay, a fair point. There can be those who act against the way it should work, but most of them do. And most of them do the job because that's what they're there. They're professionals
I concur with
to do the job. So they are doing it. We've got to enable them. I want to go to the attacks against this, though, because I've been through enough paperwork on this and seen that, we have this whole idea that this is somehow something cooked up by the Trump administration to restrict immigration. One, it doesn't apply to refugees. They're not included in this. Two, like many other countries, all we're saying is prove your worth. We're not a xenophobic country, but it's become a political tool here where the administration's being attacked for wanting to enforce our laws. Is that fair?
So the asylum process is accepted from it, and principally there's no application fee for asylum, and we have always been a safe haven to those that are fearing persecution, principally. But I have to say that this effort to control, from a financial metric, U.S. immigration, legal immigration, does have all the negative optics of
But I'm
potentially
talking about reality.
separating.
Look, I get optics in politics, but you know what we need? Economics doesn't care about
I
optics.
got that, but this is
Economics
rolling
is
out
our
right
reality.
before November election, David. This is an attempt.
No matter when they would have rolled this out. It was last August. If it had been processed with a listening period into Christmas, there would have been a reason. If it was in spring, it was a reason. If it was summer, no matter what it is, it's going to be treated that way because that's the politics of it.
I toil in this every day, and we see people who are coming to this beautiful nation. Again, Marines marrying foreigners, people investing in this country. Relationships are solid, then they deflate. People's economics are strong, and then they also deflate. How do you handle changes over the course of time? Well, I don't think introducing a 19-page form into a contentious issue without real comprehensive planning is the way to do it. The fact is, lawyers and newcomers are going to respect this, but it will result in more delays, more paper, and more decisions being left subjectively because of the likelihood that somebody may fall out of charge. That's the thing that offends me. If somebody can present with a third party that will backstop them financially, that document can be enforced against that third party. The fact that they didn't enforce
third party's
that.
in a foreign country.
No, it's the U.S. citizen only or a permanent resident
Right.
that can do it. And that's on the books
But that
now.
hasn't been happening, and it does exist, and it has.
Because the government chose not to, David.
Well, then the
government chose not to
and now
enforce
we
that.
have an administration that says we're going to put rules in place that force government bureaucrats who failed to do their jobs to do their jobs. Michael, it's a pleasure as
Always.
always. All right.
As
And
well, to be continued.
I like the jacket.
You too. Thank you for
We're in
having
full
me.
agreement on that.
That's right, sir.
All right. So much for the sale.